Many people in their 60s or 70s begin to notice a clear shift. They no longer feel excited about long conversations. They start avoiding large social gatherings and often decline invitations they used to look forward to. Some worry that this might be a sign of depression. Others blame themselves, thinking they've become difficult, distant, or less adaptable in social situations. But the truth is, withdrawing from social interaction more frequently as we age isn't unusual. In fact, according to many studies in psychology, it's a completely natural, even adaptive response, part of the emotional and cognitive changes that come with growing older. Our brains, just like our emotions, needs, and personal boundaries, don't stay the same over time. In our younger years, connection and expanding social circles help build identity, community, and a sense of belonging. But as we move through the later chapters of life, we begin to prioritize quality over quantity, seeking quieter, more meaningful relationships that aren't shaped by pressure or performance. In this video, we'll explore 6 common psychological reasons why many older adults begin to step back from social interaction, and why this shift isn't just normal, but can actually reflect emotional growth and a deeper sense of self-awareness. And if you stay until the end, you won't just understand why you're changing. You'll also learn how to embrace this change without feeling lonely. Because sometimes, the deepest peace comes not from the noise of the world, but from the quiet moments we once mistook for emptiness. If you're enjoying this content, comment 1 below to let me know you're here. If not, comment 0, and I'll work harder to bring you even better content. Now, let's started. Reason 1. The brain begins to prioritize quiet and emotional stability over social stimulation. One of the lesser-known changes that happens as we age is that the brain begins to reorganize how it prioritizes information and emotions. In younger years, the brain is wired for exploration. It seeks novelty, craves new experiences, and thrives on a wide range of social interactions. But as we grow older, the brain gradually shifts into a preservation mode, preferring familiarity, order, and calm. This isn't a sign of decline. It's a natural biological process. Neuroscience studies have shown that in later life, the amygdala, the brain region responsible for processing negative emotions like anger and stress, becomes less reactive. At the same time, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for social judgment and risk assessment, becomes more cautious. Simply put, older adults begin to avoid emotional strain and selectively engage in interactions that help preserve their emotional balance. This helps explain why many older adults feel drained after long small talk or uninterested in surface-level conversations. It's not that they've become distant or unfriendly. It's that their brains are conserving emotional energy, steering away from connections that no longer feel necessary. Many people feel uneasy when they find themselves withdrawing from social gatherings, skipping group events, or no longer making routine calls just to keep up. But understanding that this is the nervous system's natural way of maintaining emotional stability can bring a great sense of relief. What's important to remember is that pulling back from social interaction does not automatically mean depression or isolation. It's a kind of refinement, a way of protecting one's inner space. And when older adults are given the freedom to do this without judgment, they often find deeper peace and more meaningful relationships. If you've noticed yourself craving more quiet, speaking less, or narrowing your circle, it doesn't mean something is wrong. It may simply mean that your brain is shifting toward what feels safer, clearer, and more peaceful. And in a world full of noise, the ability to choose silence is a deeply honorable form of emotional maturity. There's another quiet factor, not rooted in biology, but shaped by life experience, that also leads people to gradually withdraw from social interaction. And that's exactly what we're going to explore next. Reason 2. The experience of age makes you more cautious in relationships. Youth often brings with it a kind of wide-eyed belief that everyone is worth connecting with, and that any relationship can become meaningful if we're sincere enough. But after years of living, experiencing, hoping, and being disappointed, people start to realize that true closeness doesn't come from the number of people we meet. It comes from the depth and safety we feel within a connection. According to psychologists, the older we get, the more we begin to rely on a kind of experience filter in our relationships. We become better at reading emotions. We pick up on insincerity more quickly, and we no longer easily tolerate the kind of energy that leaves us feeling drained. Choosing to step back, then, is not about social anxiety. It's about avoiding repeated emotional harm. Some have been betrayed by a friend's trust, have spoken too much only to be met with silence, or have helped someone and ended up misunderstood. These small wounds, over time, shape a quiet defense mechanism, and people begin to learn that peace doesn't come from being surrounded by many, it comes from being near the right ones. In many families, loved ones may feel that a parent or grandparent is becoming grumpy, withdrawn, or closed off, but in reality, they're simply being more discerning, because they now know who truly listens, who shows up with honesty, and who's simply there out of obligation. And that discernment isn't a negative thing. In fact, it's a sign of psychological maturity, a phase when we begin to set healthy boundaries, stop trying to please everyone, and start protecting our emotional space. If you find yourself less eager to share, less willing to open up to new connections, it doesn't mean you're shutting down. It simply means you're living more deeply, choosing quality over quantity. A quiet kind of wisdom, expressed through intentional choices. Reason 3. You start to realize that some conversations no longer bring anything truly meaningful. There's a quiet shift that happens in later life that few people notice, a growing sensitivity to superficiality. The casual conversations, polite check-ins, or stories full of facts but lacking connection. They no longer hold your attention the way they used to. And so gradually, you begin to retreat. Not because you're tired or uninterested, but because those interactions leave nothing meaningful behind. Psychologists call this emotional selectivity. As people grow older, they tend to care less about new information or what others are doing, and more about authenticity and depth in their connections. They don't need many topics, just the feeling of being heard, of being understood, or simply sitting next to someone without having to please anyone. That's why loud gatherings, recycled conversations, or chats where everyone talks but no one listens begin to feel draining. Older adults slowly step back from those circles, not because they don't want connection, but because they realize that forced connection can feel lonelier than silence. Some people who were once the life of every party, the ones always being called when friends gathered, now choose to sit quietly with a cup of tea and just one friend. No more buzz, no need to be the center of attention, just peace and something real. If you've ever sat in a room full of people and felt like you didn't belong, or ended a phone call feeling more empty than before it started, you've touched this truth. Not every interaction holds the same value. And that doesn't mean you're becoming negative or difficult. It simply means you're starting to prioritize real presence over just being surrounded. You don't need a crowd to feel less lonely. You just need one honest moment, one genuine connection, someone quiet enough to truly listen. Reason 4. Changing social roles mean you no longer feel like you belong in groups like you used to. In youth and middle age, most relationships are formed and maintained through social roles: co-workers, neighbors, fellow parents, members of a community group. There's a reason to come together, a story to start with, a responsibility that keeps the connection going. But at a certain stage of life, those roles begin to fade, leaving behind a quiet space that few are truly prepared for. You no longer go to work. You're not driving grandchildren to school. You're not in the PTA meetings, not being asked for advice the way you once were. And as those roles gradually disappear, so too do many of the social interactions attached to them. Not because you no longer want to connect, but simply because the places you once belonged to no longer say your name in their conversations. Psychologists refer to this as a transition in social identity, when a person no longer sees a clear role for themselves in the lives of others. And this shift often leads to more caution in social settings, or even silence, not out of shyness, but to avoid feeling like an outsider. Many older adults have shared that they no longer feel at ease attending group meetings, catching up with old friends, or joining communal activities, not because of health reasons, but because they no longer feel like someone with a specific place in that space. Silence slowly replaces presence. They listen more than they speak, observe more than they share, and sometimes step away entirely, not wanting to be the person just there to fill a seat. But rather than seeing this as something negative, psychologists suggest this stage should be understood and reframed. It's a time to rebuild relationships not based on old roles, but on genuine emotional connection. Older adults can still connect, just in a different way, more deeply, more selectively, and not out of obligation, but from a place of comfort and emotional safety. If you've ever found yourself at a group gathering unsure of what to say, or you've chosen not to attend a reunion because you felt you didn't quite fit anymore, that doesn't mean you're becoming distant. It simply means you're entering a new phase of social life, where your worth no longer comes from what you do, but from who you are. Reason 5. You realize you no longer need to try to be accepted. There is a quiet, beautiful shift that happens as we grow older. The feeling of being true to oneself begins to outweigh the desire for outside approval. In youth, many people feel the need to blend in, follow social norms, or do things to please others. But after walking a long road in life, you start to realize something profound. Peace doesn't come from how others see you, but from the sense that you no longer have to try so hard. Psychologists refer to this as a detachment from social approval, meaning that over time, people gradually release themselves from the pressure to please everyone and instead begin living in alignment with their inner needs. This helps explain why many older adults start turning down invitations, withdrawing from small talk, or stepping away from large social groups. It's not because they're distant or unfriendly. It's because they no longer feel the need to prove anything. They've lived enough to know what drains them, what soothes them, and what truly matters. Instead of seeking out relationships built on obligation, they begin choosing interactions that feel light, spaces where they can simply be themselves, without performing, without forced laughter, without playing a part. And when they don't find that space, they walk away, not out of anger, but with quiet clarity. It's not needed. This isn't closing off. It's a kind of healing refinement. It's the stage where a person is mature enough to understand they don't have to show up everywhere, be invited to every event, or speak in every conversation. Silence becomes a conscious choice, not because they are lonely, but because they are enough. If you've ever felt like you no longer need to say what others want to hear, or no longer feel the pressure to maintain an image, you may be entering one of the most beautiful seasons of life. The season where self-acceptance becomes the greatest gift of all. Reason 6. You begin to value your energy and choose to save it for what really matters. There's something that only becomes truly clear as we grow older. Our emotional energy is no longer limitless. Every conversation, every meeting, every interaction, no matter how small, takes up a portion of our attention, a piece of our energy. And at some point, you realize you need to be more intentional with how you spend it. It's not because you're weaker, it's because you've begun to understand more clearly than ever which things are truly worth opening your heart for, which relationships are worth keeping, and which quiet moments deserve to be protected. That clarity leads you to quietly withdraw from shallow conversations, social gatherings done out of obligation, or connections that no longer feel meaningful. According to experts in positive aging, this is a clear sign of emotional wisdom in later life. when older adults begin to prioritize peace over busyness and choose quality over quantity in every aspect of life, from daily routines to social relationships. There's no longer the pressure to be everywhere, no more effort to please every circle of people. Instead, there is a quiet mindfulness. You reserve your energy for your children and grandchildren, a few dear friends, a warm phone call, or simply for yourself, in a quiet afternoon spent watching the garden grow without needing anyone to talk to. And that's not selfish. It's a natural shift from giving yourself to everything to keeping enough to live meaningfully within yourself. You no longer want to scatter your presence everywhere. You want to gather it so it can go deeper, feel truer, be fewer, but matter more. If you find yourself becoming more selective with calls, plans, or responses, it doesn't mean you're losing connection. It may just mean you're reconnecting with the most important part of all, the quiet steadiness within you. The 6 reasons in this video aren't here to convince you to change. They're here to help you understand that you are not unusual, not wrong, and certainly not cold. These shifts are natural. They're part of emotional growth, part of the transition from needing to fit in to finally being yourself. If you saw yourself in these reflections, I hope you no longer feel the need to apologize for wanting to be alone, no longer feel guilty for choosing silence instead of replying, and no longer feel the pressure to stay in connections your heart has quietly outgrown. Because sometimes, stepping back from the world is the very thing that brings you closer to what matters most, yourself. And if this video felt like a quiet whisper at just the right time, chances are someone else out there needs it too. So don't hesitate to share it with someone you care about, as a gentle way of saying, I see you, and you're not alone. If you'd like to stay connected with more content like this, soft, thoughtful, and healing, please click like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell, so that every time you open YouTube, there's a quiet space waiting for you. Not loud, not rushed, just a place calm enough to listen. Thank you for staying until the very end. I wish you enough peace to enjoy your own company, and enough tenderness to open your heart again whenever you're ready.